Hello there, and welcome to Steeples and Steel. This is a history podcast slash episodes where we're going to kind of take a look and delve into events and things that happened and just kind of cover them a little deeper or in a little more detail than usual. And also get to kind of talk through some fascinating and important events in our history. I was a teacher for 5 to 6 years, and I taught college-level history. Absolutely loved it. One of the things that a history teacher often runs into is you're kind of having a hop, skip, and jump over a lot of stuff, and you don't really get a chance to kind of really seriously get to dive into a lot of topics, especially when you're teaching history of Civ or you're teaching American history. It often doesn't, you don't often have the chance to really get to cover some of these topics in a lot more detail. And so when I decided to do this history series or podcast or whatever you want to call it, because what I'm planning on doing eventually, and this is obviously episode 1, so just kind of bear with me because it's going to be rough. There's definitely going to be some glitches and things that probably are not going to be the best. I'm definitely used to speaking in front of a crowd, so it is going to take a little bit of just kind of talking to a computer screen. I'm going to try this one without camera, and then I'm going to try the next episode with camera, and we're going to kind of see just how it goes as far as all of that's concerned. But I just want to let you guys know that I'm super thankful for you. I definitely miss teaching. One of the hardest decisions I made, I guess, was to step away from teaching for a little bit, and it's a decision I definitely regret. But you know, the Lord allows everything to happen for a reason, and I'm super grateful for this opportunity. It's an opportunity I would not have had otherwise, and so it's nice to kind of be able to dive into some things that I would not have had the chance to get to cover or would not have had the time to get to cover as deeply. Now, one of the things that is interesting to me is when you take a look at the assassination of Lincoln and just presidents in general. It's something that you don't really think about all the twists and turns of it. There was this unique perspective in American history up to this point that assassination was un-American. It was something you saw in Rome, it was something you saw in Greece, it was something you saw in Europe and in other countries, in Asia, China, Korea, Japan. There were other assassinations of leaders, but this was just un-American. This was something that just did not happen. And Lincoln's assassination, of course, is going to change all of that. The crazy part to me is it was kind of seen as a one-off for quite a while, and you're going to see in a minute or two, we're going to kind of talk through that there was definitely a lot more to it than just that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to mention... we're going to try to mention a couple of different things about Lincoln's assassination, some of the cool factors with it, and go from there. The night of April 14th, 1865, was not the first time that Lincoln had an assassination attempt on his life, or that there was a conspiracy against Lincoln. One of the things that is fascinating, the longer and more research that I've done on this, is number one, just how few people actually truly know to this day what really happened in Lincoln's assassination. And I'm not talking about conspiracy theories or anything like that. I'm referencing the fact that even to this day, a lot of the stories of exactly what happened and who said what and who did what and some of the main events of the assassination are still up for debate. That's one thing you're going to notice the more you look into history. The more that you dive into a subject, the more you're going to see that there are a lot of different interpretations of what happened, and sometimes, especially when you're looking at ancient history, forget it. You don't really know what happened and what didn't, and your best guess is an educated guess. And you're going to see that as well. There were a couple of attempts on Lincoln's life long before, April 14th, 1865, which coincidentally happened to be Good Friday. There was an attempt about a month before, on March 18th, 1865, to kidnap Lincoln, and the plan was they were going to use him as a POW to get all Confederate POWs released from custody. There was a a hospital that was close by to Washington, D.C., where it was well known that Lincoln would actually visit from time to time. And apparently, on these visits, he was quite moved by the suffering and the plight of the soldiers, and it was not uncommon for him to appear late at night or in the wee hours of the morning and kind of walk up and down the beds. There's a story that was told about Lincoln when there was an amputee that he had been talking about or seeing, and the doctor went into quite the detail about how you had to saw the arm off, and of course all the different procedures you had to do to make sure the patient doesn't bleed out and the shock of it. And he's going on, and Lincoln interrupts him and says, "But how is the patient doing?" And Lincoln was not somebody who was not used to grief. There's a famous letter that he wrote to Mrs. Bixby when she lost 5 sons in one battle. And the letter is kind of almost, it's touching in a way. And also, to me, it's even more touching because it's coming from someone who knew grief himself. He lost a son, Willie, in 1862, and apparently this is where his wife Mary, she was always kind of high-strung to begin with, but after losing her son Willie, and to be fair to his wife Mary, she was viewed as a pro-Southern sympathizer, that she was from Kentucky. Some of her family fought for the Confederacy. Kentucky was kind of a border state. There was a lot of people who were pro-Confederacy. There were people who were pro-slavery. Matter of fact, of course, Lincoln and Jefferson Davis are both going to come from the state of Kentucky. One thing that is interesting, and I do apologize if you hear the whirring in the background, it's the AC unit running. That's something that I can't really control. I do apologize about that. Hopefully it doesn't pick it up too much, but we'll just work with it and see how it goes. If you hear it, my apologies. If not, just ignore what I'm saying. But Jefferson Davis and Lincoln are both going to be from Kentucky. Mary Lincoln is going to be accused by many in the North of being a pro-Southern sympathizer, that she's secretly feeding information to her friends and family in the South. And those attacks really hurt. But it's when she loses her son Willie that she really kind of starts to become borderline psychotic. She would go on shopping episodes where she would buy hundreds of pairs of gloves at a time. She'd go on an insane shopping spree. She had a very sharp tongue and was not afraid to use it on people. And even on her own husband, from time to time, you could tell he would kind of get a tongue lashing or get browbeat. And the one thing that was interesting as well is it really did seem to level Abraham Lincoln too. And if you ever take a look, sometimes you can see how much Lincoln ages in office from 1861 to 1865. Matter of fact, they said that a couple of times he actually would, because Willie was buried in a crypt, and there were 2 or 3 times that people talked about where he would go at night and he would ask for Willie's coffin to be opened, and he would just sit there and look at his son. And there's some stories that say he talked to him. There are others that just say he just wanted to gaze upon the face of his son. But death was not an uncommon thing back in this era. It was not until the 1900s where you're going to have over half of people make it to adulthood. And a lot of times, one of the reasons that there was such a high death rate was a lot of kids would die at relatively early ages. Whether it was from disease, whether it was from farming accidents, getting run over by a horse and carriage, something that could have been easily avoidable. So Lincoln, all of that to say, Lincoln was well accustomed to the suffering of his men and understood, probably more than any other wartime leader before or since in some regards, what he was putting his men and his boys through. And he would often take time to write handwritten letters, as I mentioned before, to there was one that you get a chance to look it up, to a Mrs. Bixby who lost 5 of her sons in a battle. I don't remember which one it was, but that is something. I remember even as a kid, they had a collection of Abraham Lincoln memorabilia that came through, and that was one of the pieces, and that was something that always stuck with me. So Lincoln was going to see this play that was being put on for the benefit of wounded Union soldiers. John Wilkes Booth and his Confederates get a wind of this, and with basically about 45 minutes to put their plan together, they leap on their horses and basically don't even bother to. They just say that Lincoln's going to be here. This is where he's going to be. They take off on horseback, and they camp along this county road where Lincoln is supposed to be. There's a little bit of debate about this because who ends up happening to appear on this county road is somebody that neither of them are going to expect. And here's another picture of where the hospital is. None of the conspirators are going to guess who this guy is, but it was Salmon Chase, who is Secretary of the Treasury and then is also going to end up becoming a Supreme Court justice. There's a couple of different versions of the story. There's one where Salmon Chase actually says as he's riding along to this event at the hospital, he sees John Wilkes Booth gallop alongside him, kind of, peer into the carriage and then ride off when he realizes that it is not Lincoln. And then there are others where, Booth just kind of, and his conspirators kind of cool their heels. Nothing really happens. Lincoln, actually, ironically enough, is going to go to the hotel where John Wilkes Booth was living at the time, and he's going to do an event there. So this comedy of errors in some ways is kind of a precursor to what's going to end up happening. There was another attempt on Lincoln's life where somebody shot at him, and nobody knows for sure, but there are rumors that John Wilkes Booth was the one who shot at Lincoln. But Lincoln comes back from a ride one day, and of course he had his famous stovepipe hat. He was 6'4", and of course his hat added probably another foot to his frame, and he shows up and says that somebody shot at him. There was some hunter who was being careless, discharged his weapon, and they found Lincoln's hat with a bullet hole through it. And it was kind of hushed up for fear of worrying people in government, and of course people concerned for Lincoln's safety. And one of the things that's interesting is Lincoln, he may have known that it was somebody trying to shoot at him, but he just kind of laughed it off as a careless hunter. And one of the things that's interesting to me, the more I was looking in Lincoln's life, is many presidents think that they're going to be in office forever and their legacy is going to be for forever. And Lincoln was one of the few that actually does kind of know, seemingly, he has these premonitions that he's going to die. There's the famous story a couple of weeks before his death where he is walking through the White House and he hears sobbing and sees, funeral crepe everywhere. And he goes and talks to a guard and says, "What are they sobbing for?" It's the president. He is in state in the East Room, which ironically enough is going to end up happening to Lincoln. One other thing, kind of going back to Salmon Chase, he's actually going to end up being featured. He's one of the things he does, besides being Secretary of the Treasury during the Civil War, is going to be, he really starts, there was a lot of wildcat banks, as they were known, where banking was done. Primarily, each bank could issue its own notes, and of course, some of them were more well-grounded than others. Some of them had assets to back them up. Some of them, they just turned on the printing presses and just issued as much as they could. And so Salmon Chase, in honor of this, he's actually going to be on the first $2 bill that comes out. And then in honor of this, they're going to make $10,000 notes, which was the highest currency that an American could have back in the 1900s, and his face is going to be on them. There were $500 notes at one point, $1,000 notes at one point, $5,000, $10,000, which would have been the highest circulating, and then a $100,000 note, which was for transactions between the Treasury Department and branches of government. The highest one that you could have in circulation was the $10,000 note. And a couple things that are interesting about this, it's going to be dropped from circulation for obvious reasons. Number one, it's really hard to break a $10,000 note. Can you imagine going to a gas station and trying to make change for a $10,000 bill? Even if you just bought $50 worth of gas, and then some candy bars and soda, that's still a lot. You'd have to really break a $10,000 bill. And then also, of course, counterfeiting was a big thing too. And so what ends up happening is these are actually there's only 350 that are left, and they're still considered legal tender, but obviously the collector value of these is way more than the actual notes themselves. And so if you ever find one, in the collector's terms, it's worth way more. So there's about 350 left in circulation. All of this to say, on March 18th, 1865, there is an incredible kidnapping attempt that is made on Lincoln's life. And time again, Lincoln either changes his plans or things just don't work out for John Wilkes Booth and his conspirator crowd. And what's going to end up happening is, after the Civil War ends, in Booth's mind, it's going to switch now. Lincoln must pay for the sins that he's committed against the South, and we're going to talk about some of the things, how this ends up happening in just a second. Let's talk really quickly about some some of the presidents who end up dying in office. If you're ever interested, there is a book called Accidental Presidents by Jared Cohen. I just finished it a couple of days ago, and keep in mind, any of the recommendations I give to you, I don't always agree with everything in there, but it is a really well done book about the vice presidents who succeed these presidents who end up dying in office. Some of them were prepared for it, some of them were woefully unprepared for it, and some of them were just put on, the ticket because they come from a swing state, or they have some credibility to lend to the ticket, but they're not necessarily good leaders. We'll talk about some of those maybe in another another lecture or presentation or podcast episode later. And I do in the future definitely want to have, and we're going to work on it as things kind of get up and running here, I do want to have people on and talk through different events with them and get some feedback, so it's not just me talking talking your ear off the entire time. So William Henry Harrison at this up to this time is going to be the oldest president at the age of 69, which is spring chicken now compared to the record has been broken repeatedly since then. And so one of the things that's interesting is he's going to give the longest inauguration address in history, and he refuses to wear an overcoat, refuses to wear a hat, and it's like this really kind of downpour and it's cold. He ends up taking sick and dies, and nobody really knows what to do. What happens? There was obviously vice president, and the vice president was kind of almost put on as an afterthought. Matter of fact, they had to amend the Constitution for it, to make sure that how the vice president was elected. But the problem is, does he become president immediately after with the president's death, or is he acting? Is he just an acting president, kind of the custodian who's in charge, or the substitute teacher until a new president is elected? And what ends up happening is when John Tyler is informed that he is going to be president, basically he's told he's going to be acting president, and that's it. And John Tyler does some things, and we wouldn't necessarily agree with everything he does. He ends up kind of alienating everybody, and kind of ends up splitting the Whig Party, which was in response to Andrew Jackson. But he basically splits the Whig Party. And matter of fact, when some of the stuff that he does is so controversial, senators are brawling about it on the floors of the Senate. They actually had a mob that came to the White House and is burning a effigy of John Tyler in frustration and anger. And nobody knew what was going to happen next, but a light pops on in the White House, and the mob, they had been way too deep in the alcohol. They end up dispersing. So kind of in terror. But it could have ended up a whole lot differently. The mob was clearly intent on taking out their frustration about Tyler, and that's a whole nother episode for another time to maybe talk through his ascension to power. But we do have him to kind of be thankful for, in some regards, that he basically says, no, I'm not acting vice president. He returns any mail that is addressed to President Tyler, and then he is going to really kind of make it plain that he is the one in charge. A lot of his own cabinet ends up resigning because they just do not like Tyler at all. And Tyler becomes a very unpopular president. Probably his only contribution that is really well known is incorporating Texas into the Union. And that even causes some controversy between the pro-slavery and the anti-slavery forces. And what ends up happening is, of course, he is going to kind of retire in disgrace. Or not retire, but he's going to serve out the rest of Harrison's term in disgrace. Zachary Taylor is going to be another president who is going to die in office. Kind of a big war hero. One thing that's interesting is Jefferson Davis was his son-in-law. And early on, they do not get along at all. He does not want his daughter to marry Jeff Davis. But when she's going to marry him, they're going to be related, and then she ends up dying. And ironically enough, he really couldn't stand Jeff Davis early on, but he becomes one of his closest advisors and confidants. Matter of fact, he served in his cabinet as Secretary of War, which would be the modern day Secretary of Defense. He's going to end up he's going to end up dying after drinking some milk and eating some cherries, and there's a lot of debate about this. Matter of fact, so much debate to whether he was poisoned with arsenic or whether he something, so there was a kind of a conspiracy. There are people who thought there was an assassination attempt on his life. So much so they dug up his bones to test for arsenic, and that nothing came back from it. So what most likely happened is Washington, D.C. for so long had been built on a swamp, and people would just dump sewage and everything straight into the rivers. And probably what ended up happening was it infected the milk and the cherries. He ends up dying from complications due to that. And then Millard Fillmore is going to take over. and he's going to be well known for the Compromise of 1850, which really kind of pushes the United States toward the Civil War. Lincoln, of course, we're going to talk about him in a lot more detail, so I'm not going to spend too much time with him. Unfortunately for the country, after Lincoln is shot, the person who is next in line to succeed him, Andrew Johnson, is probably the worst vice president that ever became president. Just antagonizes a lot of people, and it didn't look like it at the time, but when he becomes Lincoln's vice president, and then ends up becoming president after Lincoln's assassination, it just does not go well for Andrew Johnson. Then you're going to have James Garfield, who is going to be gunned down by an office seeker. One of the things that's fascinating, and just to kind of show you really quickly here, with Lincoln and Garfield, is both of them would have met their assassins at some point before their deaths. Matter of fact, Lincoln is actually going to pay to see his assassin, not just once, but a couple of times. And there's a couple of stories that went around where he was so impressed with John Wilkes Booth's acting, he asked for a meeting with him. Booth kind of said that his schedule was full, and then kind of, they kind of dodged back and forth for a while. And then, of course, they are going to meet again, and with some catastrophic consequences. And we'll talk about that more in just a few minutes. But Garfield is going to have a crazed office seeker who's convinced he helped Garfield win the election. He actually seeks a job from Garfield, and he's got a few screws loose in the belfry kind of thing. And Garfield doesn't give him the job, so he decides he has to go, and he ends up killing Garfield. And that's another story maybe we can talk about for another time as well. Candace Millard, Destiny of the Republic, is a fascinating book on Garfield's the assassination of Garfield and the events that go after that. Then you have William McKinley, who is going to end up being gunned down by a Polish anarchist in Buffalo, New York. He's in a receiving line, and the guy basically has a bandage wrapped over his hand, fires a couple of shots into him. One strikes a button on his coat and ricochets off. The other one is going to end up being is going to end up going into his body. And they talked about that McKinley's a little bit overweight, and so they had to basically go through like 3 inches of fat to try to find the bullet. And because kind of similar to Garfield, his doctors, unfortunately, Garfield's doctors, are going to end up killing him, and it's kind of somewhat the same thing. They were a little more careful with with McKinley than they were with Garfield. They're not poking around with unwashed hands or unsanitized instruments, but still, McKinley's going to get gangrene and is going to end up dying, and of course, Teddy Roosevelt is going to take over after his death. Then you had Warren Harding, who most likely, and it's hard to, we can't only can predict a few things about events that haven't happened, but Harding is going to go down as one of the more corrupt presidents in history up to that point. He kind of had this famous quote where he said, "My friends are the ones who keep me, walking the floors at night," and he just did not pick really good people to be in his cabinet. They're taking advantage of the positions. They're getting all sorts of kickbacks and bribes from oil well leases, and among other things. And most likely, if Harding had lived, he's going to end up dying. Some people think he was killed by his wife to prevent the stain of the revelations from coming out. It's really hard to know, but there was kind of an investigation into Harding at the time he was dying. Yeah, he kind of had a slower death as well. He's on a tour, and it was pretty obvious to people that he was slowly starting to fade, and is going to end up he's going to end up dying in office, and Coolidge is going to take over. And Coolidge was squeaky clean enough, especially compared to Harding, that he is going to basically kind of keep cool with Coolidge is going to be the slogan of the 20s. Then you had FDR. He's going to be in office for four. He's going to win 4 presidential elections, and by the time the 4th one comes around, it is obvious to everybody he's only in his mid-60s, but he is dying, and he is dying fast. Just has kind of the sunken look of an older man. The mouth kind of hanging open. He's having to sit down a lot more, and so when people get together for the Democratic Convention of 1944, they put a huge amount of emphasis on who his vice president is going to be, and they basically are going to pick Harry Truman. And interestingly enough, Truman was only about 2 years younger than FDR, but looked way younger compared to him. And FDR, of course, is going to die in office. Truman is going to end up taking over. Then, of course, one of the things that's fascinating to me is some of the similarities between the assassinations of Lincoln and JFK. We may have to do a video or a kind of a talk on JFK as well. But the similarities between the assassination of JFK and the assassination of Lincoln cannot be understated. And it was was one of those, everybody knew where they were when they heard the news that JFK had been assassinated in Dallas, Texas by Lee Harvey Oswald. A lot of, debate rages to this day as to whether he acted alone, whether he was part of a conspiracy, and you're going to see that even with Lincoln's assassination, there was some of that as well. There were a couple of assassination attempts up to this point. There was one on President Andrew Jackson. There was this kind of disaffected painter by the name of Richard Lawrence. He was clinically insane, and he thought that he was Richard III of England. He thought that he was all these different people. And I guess he one day confronts Jackson in Washington, D.C., pulls a pistol out, shoots at point-blank range, and the pistol just clicks. It misfires. No problem there. He's got another pistol in his pocket. He pulls out another one, points it at the president. Boom. Same thing, except boom is probably the wrong word here. Click is probably the better option because the gun also misfires. At this point, Jackson's actually going to jump the guy, beats him with his cane. Richard Lawrence should have probably picked a better target because Jackson had 2 bullets in him from duels. There was somebody who had insulted his wife. There was another one. Jackson was well known for kind of a hair-trigger temper and was more than willing to, he said at one point he would be willing to hang his own vice president when there was a succession crisis in South Carolina during his administration. He would be willing to string him up from the nearest lamppost. And so Jackson was not the kind of guy you wanted to trifle with. What is interesting is after the assassination attempt happened, people took the guns and they took them out to the range, and both guns fired and worked perfectly. They said the odds of both guns misfiring was something in the neighborhood of 1 in 125,000. That both guns misfiring, back to back like that was just next to unheard of, and the Lord's hand was definitely on Andrew Jackson's life at that point. Davy Crockett was actually in the crowd and helped wrestle the assassin to the ground, and he's going to end up being stuck in a mental institution until his death. Then of course, that's kind of the last serious one. We talked about the one where Lincoln, of course, is going to get shot through the hat. We talked about the kidnapping attempts up to this point. But now you're going to see where this is going to kind of pick up steam. So the second inauguration, as a matter of fact, this is the first one that is actually photographed. And one of the things that's interesting, you can kind of see a little bit, and let me see if I can show you here. There's sometimes can be a little bit of smudging from fingerprints. There's a little bit of smudging right here. There's some smudging up, toward here as well. And one of the things that's interesting is in the picture of Lincoln's second inauguration, not only is there Lincoln, not only is there members of the cabinet, there's also going to be Lincoln standing here giving his second inaugural address. And then there is a lot of debate among people, but we do know for a fact that John Wilkes Booth was there. He was in attendance, and that he was fairly close to where Lincoln was. Matter of fact, he caused such a commotion at Lincoln's second inauguration that he ends up getting kicked out by the police. I guess he's just being just such a glowering presence here, and he is going to end up getting kind of booted. But you can see Lincoln and then John Wilkes Booth. There's another picture that shows him at a different angle. You can see this one to me is more likely John Wilkes Booth with the top hat, and then what you can kind of see is where it says Lincoln, somebody accidentally put their thumb on it when they were developing the negative or the print for it, and is going to end up kind of smudging Lincoln out. But you can see the podium from where he would have been speaking. And then interestingly enough, there were some of the conspirators also in the crowd as well. It's hard to know if they were doing reconnaissance to see how strong Lincoln's security or his bodyguard would have been. It's really kind of hard to know, but you can see that Booth was not very far away from where Lincoln was. Let's kind of talk about the Booths really quickly, because unlike so many of the other assassins in presidential assassins or assassins in history, you're going to see that a lot of them are loners. They're politically crazy, or they have these voices in their head telling them to do it, or these premonitions saying that they should do it. John Wilkes Booth is not going to be that way. Matter of fact, he is going to be one of the most well-known people in America up to that point, and unfortunately for the Booth family, he is going to go down in infamy, kind of almost like a Judas Iscariot or a Brutus, where he is just going to be considered kind of a absolute nothing good about him. The Booths were some of the most famous actors in America at the time, and it's actually going to come from their father, Junius Booth. He's kind of an interesting character in and of himself. Very, very long story short, was heavily addicted to alcohol and was kind of almost not suicidal, but would trying to think the right way to word this, where he would have some really probably bipolar, schizophrenic, probably be classified under any number of labels today. There were a couple of times where he would threaten, he's going to kill himself, he's going to drink all of the family's money away. And as a matter of fact, what ends up happening is he is going to have one family in England, and then he's going to bail on them, and he is going to flee with another girl to America, and is going to end up setting up camp in outside of Baltimore, Maryland, and that is going to be where the second girl is going to be the mother of the Booth family. John Wilkes Booth is going to be the youngest, and a couple of things that I thought were interesting is he had a bunch of siblings, but very common for this time period. Not all of his siblings are going to make it to adulthood. And there's a couple that are going to become very famous like their father, but their dad was incredibly well known in the 1820s and 1830s, so much so that whenever he was acting, the tickets were sold out well in advance of his performances. There was Edwin, who is going to become probably the best known performer, was very similar to his dad in some ways. And then you have, of course, John Wilkes Booth, who is going to not only be a very famous actor, but is also going to go down in history as the assassin of Abraham Lincoln. One of the things that's interesting is the second woman is going to show up, or the first woman, I guess, if you want to put it that way, and that's where I was kind of stuttering over my words, so my apologies there, is going to end up coming over with her son, shows up on the door of the Booth farm when Junius is out, and basically says, hey, by the way, he has this whole other family over in England, nice to meet you guys, where can I be put in touch with my husband? As you can imagine, John is relatively young at this time, but it causes all sorts of issues in the family, severe tension, and just a lot of problems. And Junius is gone. I think Edwin is also gone as well. But John catches on that something is up and really starts acting out. They said he enjoyed kind of killing cats for the fun of it. He also is going to carve his initials everywhere, including at one point is going to actually carve his initials into his left hand, JWB, everywhere. And then is really going to start acting out to the point where he's sent off to basically like a boys' school, and then is going to be sent off to military school. He really is almost like a mama's boy. He gets along with his mother way better than he does his father. And one of the things that's interesting to me is Edwin is going to actually be traveling with his dad. And this was, John is jealous because, of course, he's imagining, oh, Edwin's getting to have all the fun. He's going on tour. He's seeing all these theater productions and everything. Edwin, the reason he was keeping him there was the family was keeping him with Junius, the father, was basically to make sure that Junius doesn't drink away all of the family's money that he's making on the theater. And at one point, I guess, and this had to be scarring for Edwin as a young boy, Junius basically says, I'm going to kill myself, you got to stop me, and like takes off running through the streets, and I think it was in Louisville, if I remember correctly, and Edwin's, he's only like 10 or 12 years old, he's chasing through the streets, begging his dad to stop, and his dad's just so, kind of drunk that he just thinks it's funny and just keeps on doing it, and it was just one of those things where it's just kind of really traumatic for Edwin, is what, it's just really kind of a very, very rough family upbringing, and Edwin and John Wilkes are both going to kind of suffer from this. One of the other things that was kind of fascinating to me was before the assassination of Lincoln, John Wilkes Booth is actually going to be very well liked by the ladies. So much so that he's actually going to get a bunch of raunchy letters from women all the way up until when he assassinates Lincoln, and then of course that is going to change a little bit as well. All of that to say, John Wilkes Booth hates his dad. And unfortunately for him, he gets a lot of, oh, you look just like your father. You act just like your father. And that really kind of riles John Wilkes Booth up, as you can kind of imagine. He does not like being compared to his dad, but he is a decent actor. The first couple times he acts, apparently it does not go well at all. He actually gets booed off stage the first 3 times. He forgets his lines. He mixes them up. It just is not a good It's not good at all. And what ends up happening is he starts becoming kind of almost like not a method actor, but he starts getting better at some of his roles. But he would throw himself into roles with such abandon. At one point in Albany, he's performing and he drives a knife like 3 inches into his chest. Just probably had a little bit of insanity in the family. And unfortunately for the Booth family, you're going to see that they become some of the more infamous. What do you do when you're related to somebody who is gone down in history for killing a president? We'll talk about that in just a minute. So, interestingly enough, like father, like son in some regards, Junius is going to make a death threat to Andrew Jackson, who we talked about survives that assassination attempt by Richard Lawrence. And one of the interesting things about this was, for a long time, people thought that this was made up, that this was wasn't true, and they looked based off of the schedule where Junius was, because people would come from miles around to see his performances. And of course, without television and radio and all the stuff we have now, watching a theater production was kind of high, fine entertainment. So this is what Junius Booth's death threat to Andrew Jackson said. It was written from Brown's Hotel in Philadelphia on July 14th? July 4th, 1835. Oh, so July 4th. Interesting. So it says, and I blanked out the words here, but you blanked old scoundrel, if you don't sign the pardon of your fellow men, sick, basically the way that it was written, now under sentence of death, De Ruiz and De Soto, who were pirates that were on trial, and apparently this is quite the famous trial. It kind of captured the attention of the nation, much like O.J. Simpson or a Casey Anthony trial had done to the nation, modern day. And it says, I will cut your throat whilst you are sleeping. I wrote to you repeated caution to look out, or blank you, I'll have you burnt at the stake in the city of Washington. And then it says, your master, Junius Brutus Booth, you know me, look out. Fascinating look into the mind of kind of a crazed individual. More than likely he was probably drunk. And so this was sent, and I don't know if he ever was actually going to follow through on it or not, but he does send this death threat to Jackson. After his John Wilkes Booth's father is going to die relatively young, probably more likely from complications brought on by just non-stop alcohol and drinking. And what's going to end up happening is Edwin and John Wilkes are going to end up kind of dividing up the United States, between the two of them for acting. Edwin is going to get the North. This is not done out of the goodness of Edwin's heart. Edwin takes the North for a couple different reasons. There were a lot of bigger cities, there's more money to be had, and he basically sends John Wilkes down because you're the little brother, shut up, put up, deal with it. And unfortunately, in some regards, this is going to kind of spur John Wilkes toward where he ends up becoming very pro-Southern. He's going to be, he really likes the Southern culture, the Southern economy. He's okay with slavery, that, in his mind, that the Africans are in their place, and that the white folk are in their place in his mind. And so what ends up happening is he thinks that this is not necessarily a bad thing. Whereas Edwin is going to be kind of more pro-Northern, and is going to have a lot more Union sympathies. So Edwin kind of does this because, once again, he really is much more interested in the money side of things, and there's more money to be had up north than there is down south. And so that's where John Wilkes is going to kind of start to get some of his tendencies from. This is one of the only times that the three Booth brothers are going to end up acting together, and you can see Edwin's in the middle, and then John Wilkes is going to be on the left of this picture. They're in New York City, and there was a Confederate uprising, kind of almost like a terror attack in New York City, where they started setting buildings on fire, and the plan was to kind of cause confusion and chaos and make it so that people really wouldn't know where people were. And so what's going to end up happening is, I guess, in the middle of the performance, the firemen just start dragging their hoses through the auditorium stage and down the corridors. Back then, the threat of fire... Hold on a second. Sorry about that. Our dog Potato saw something and barked at it, so I do apologize. That is something I'll try to either edit out, or if it's in there, I'll try to show you in the next one where I have a video camera. I'll try to show you Potato himself. I do apologize about that. So what's going to end up happening is they're dragging these hoses through, and incredibly, nobody bolts for the doors, because it was very common for people to kind of rush the doors and just kind of cause this panicked mass. And a lot of times, many people would die in these fires more from the panic than anything else. I guess they're kind of talking through all of this. They realize it's a Confederate attempt to kind of burn down buildings in New York City and elicit support for their cause. John Wilkes Booth says that, hey, I'm actually a fan of the Confederacy. And I guess there were the draft riots that were going on as well in New York City at this time, where people did not want to be drafted into the conflict and start, attacking the Irish and the African sections of town, unfortunately. And what's going to end up happening is John Wilkes is going to basically express sympathies for the South, for the Confederates, and Edwin is going to kick him out of the house. I guess the argument gets so bitter that he kicks him out of the house, and it's the last time that the two brothers are really going to talk to each other face to face. It was one of the last times all three would perform together. John Brown is going to do a raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which is West Virginia now, in 1859. Kind of to explain all of this and how this ties in, John Brown was convinced that he needed to kind of get things moving along. It was the Compromise of 1850, which is going to allow for the Runaway Slave Act, where now you could pursue escaped slaves into the North, and you could drag them back down to slavery and to the South. That really kind of lights the fire under John Brown. He's going to kind of rise to infamy or renown, depending on your point of view, in Kansas, where he's going to take part in butchering a couple of settlers in Kansas. And it's going to get the name Bleeding Kansas because there's this Kansas-Nebraska bill that is passed in 1854, where basically these states can decide whether they want to be pro-slave or pro-freedom or abolition. And what's going to end up happening is you're going to have people flooding in from both the South and the North trying to tip the scale in their favor. Nebraska was a little bit too far north, and it looked like it was going to be a safe, free state, as they called it, whereas Kansas was far enough south that there was a lot of incentive for both sides, the pro-slavery and the anti-slavery forces, to really kind of flood in and make something of it. And so what ends up happening is you're going to see that there are a lot of firefights breaking out, a lot of gun battles. John Brown gets involved in this, and then he decides he's going to launch a raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia, in 1859. What's going to end up happening is this is the spark, one of them, that is going to push the nation into the Civil War. And a couple of things about this real quick. John Brown actually is going to become a abolitionist at a relatively early age when he sees the way that one of the places that they're staying at with his parents, the way that the owner treats his slave boy just really grates him, and he doesn't think that people should be treated that way, and rightfully so. All people are equal in the eyes of God. And what ends up happening is he, at the age of 13, 14, 15, is going to be a very committed abolitionist. And he's going to travel around for a while, and then he kind of hits on the plan to go to Harper's Ferry and kind of start, in his going to kind of start a slave uprising. Keep in mind, his sons are actually kind of against this plan, not because they don't think it would work, more so they think it's really sloppily put together, and in some ways it was. John Brown had a lot of passion. He, even for his time period, was unusual that he would mix and relate with the Native Americans a lot better than a lot of people of that time period. There was that saying, an only good Indian is a dead Indian, and John Brown was not of that variety, thankfully. And what's going to end up happening is John Brown decides that I need to, kind of start this uprising. The slaves are going to come to me and are going to break away from their masters. They're going to come to me, and we're going to lead a revolt and crush slavery once and for all. We're going to make our way down south. I think that his plan, if he had stopped and thought it through, had some major holes. Number one, what happens if that doesn't work out? And then the big one was his son is going to send over, or the people that he's asking for the munitions from are going to send the weapons over piecemeal rather than a lot of them at once, as he was requesting. So he doesn't have enough weapons to begin with. And then the very, very long story short is with this raid that happens, they would have probably been better off if they had gone up into the hills and done guerrilla warfare. Because as you can kind of see, Harper's Ferry is at a choke point. You can see the hills on both sides here, and then you can see the railroad bridges that are across. It's kind of at the confluence of a couple of different rivers here. You can see there's 1, 2, and then possibly a third river that's going to flow into Harper's Ferry, now West Virginia. And even now, the railroad, of course, is going to be a major part of the town. What's going to end up happening is they do successfully seize the railroads, but they are going to let somebody out that's going to spill the beans, and then there's going to, ironically enough, a African American is going to be the first one who's shot in this raid on Harper's Ferry. The mayor is killed at one point. The townspeople are not interested at all in what is going on, and what is going to end up happening is, more than anything else, people just kind of want this gone. John Brown is going to lose a couple of sons in this. He's going to be wounded at one point, and the last stand is going to take place at this building that is in the front. You can see the railroad tracks run right along behind it, but the last stand is going to happen here. And then here's kind of a picture of what Harper's Ferry would have looked like at the time of the Civil War. So the raid is going to end up failing. Long story short, Jeb Stuart is actually going to try to negotiate. Jeb Stuart is going to become more famous as a Confederate general in the Civil War. And then, of course, Robert E. Lee, who is going to be in the Virginia militia at the time, is also going to be in part of the raid of, part of getting John Brown brought back and put on trial. So Jeb Stuart's actually going to go and talk to John Brown. There's no real change of position here. John Brown's not willing to negotiate, and the uprising that he's looking for really isn't taking place. And so what's going to end up happening is Jeb Stuart raises his hat as kind of a symbol to, a signal to people that are watching, just storm the place. They do. And what's going to end up happening is John Brown is going to be arrested, and he actually has to attend trial on a stretcher. People are livid about this. They're actually going to put John Brown and the people that do survive, out of the 21 that are here, I think there's only 8 that are going to end up surviving. 7 of them are going to try, let me make sure I get my numbers right here. There are going to be a bunch of them that are going to try to escape. 2 of them are going to end up getting caught, and then 5 of them will make it away. And then, let me make sure I got this right here. I want to make sure. Hold on just a minute here. Okay, sorry about that. I was wanting to double check here. So a couple of things about John Brown that had forgotten to mention. He is going to end up having 20 kids by the time it is all said and done. And unfortunately, though, 9 of them are going to be dead by 1855. He's going to marry twice, and 4 of his younger children are going to be dead of dysentery. His sons are going to be the ones who actually kind of encourage him to go to Kansas, and that's where John Brown kind of becomes a leading figure in the Kansas, kind of the bleeding Kansas skirmishes that happen. The raid is only going to last about 36 hours from start to finish. It's not really a very long event, but the influence it has on America cannot be overstated. So just to show you here, he is going to be put on trial for treason, as I mentioned before, even though he's not from Virginia. The governor actually is impressed with his John Brown's the way he handles himself, the way he carries himself. He's clearly not a deranged, crazy individual. He's just very committed, very passionate about what he believes in. But he is going to end up being hung. I don't know for sure how accurate this picture is. It would not surprise me if this took place. I tried to do some research into it. I don't 100% know if this did happen or not. Feel free to drop in the comment section if that is the case, if he really did indeed hug and kiss a black baby as he's on his way to the scaffold. But one thing that is interesting about John Brown's, in addition to this, because I do think that the African American community does see him as kind of like a martyr figure, and the people up north are going to see him that way as well. I think what he was trying to do is basically resurrect or revive like a Nat Turner style rebellion that happened in the 1830s in Virginia, and is going to end up killing a couple of dozen whites. But what's going to end up happening in this case is not a whole lot. It's going to be more of what he does, becoming a martyr for the cause, that is going to bring people behind him. Then you can see here, this is kind of another picture of John Brown kind of being like this avenging whirlwind in Kansas. And one of the things that is also fascinating about this is Booth gets caught up in the political drama of John Brown's raid, and he actually just skips out on his wherever he was performing. And he is going to fall in with a group of basically Virginia regulars, and is going to patrol Harper's Ferry for a while, keep an eye on, lid on trouble, and there's, guards that are here to make sure that John Brown doesn't get rescued, that there's no, detachment of people coming to save him. And John Brown does die nobly, but one of the things that is really fascinating is John Wilkes Booth in uniform, basically cosplaying as a Virginia officer or soldier, is going to stand underneath the scaffolding as John Brown hangs, and he was moved by Brown's death, said he died nobly, but also that he was kind of an idiot, that he never should have gotten to that point. And so I thought it was fascinating that Booth is not only here when John Brown is hanged, but is also, of course, going to be present at another famous event in history as well. When he comes back, he's actually fired for just disappearing and leaving for a couple of weeks without permission. But his troop actually, ironically enough, they kind of treat him as their mascot. They march on the theater where John Wilkes Booth was, and basically at gunpoint convince the owner to allow him back into the production, and that is the case. John Brown is going to be hated in the South and loved in the North. That is going to be something that you start to slowly see, the splitting of the South and the North here. And with John Brown, what is going to end up happening is, depending where you're at, some people loved him, some people hated him, but he is going to push the country closer to civil war, and I think that's kind of... Keep in mind, nobody really knew how bloody the Civil War was going to be. You're going to have almost 600,000 that are dead, father against son, brother against brother, families just ripped apart and divided. I don't think people realized in the 1850s just how severe of fighting for not only for the freedom of every man and woman and child in the United States, but also just getting rid of this idea of sectionalism, where our section is more important than the country as a whole. The song John Brown's Body Lies Moldering in the Grave is sung by Yankee soldiers as they march off to war. There's one that Pete Seeger did. If you're ever interested on YouTube, he does a really good rendition of John Brown's Body Lies Moldering in the Grave. And then the song is actually going to be used, the tune is going to be used for the much more famous song, The Battle Hymn of the Republic. The South is going to see Brown as more of a domestic terrorist, and then the North is going to see him as more of a martyr. And as I said, they're going to kind of sing this as they march off to war. Then we're going to kind of fast forward through the Civil War. That is a topic for another time period, another episode here. But what's going to end up happening is after the Civil War ends, in Booth's mind, we're now going to switch to from kidnapping to an assassination plot. He brings it up at a dinner with a bunch of his conspirators that are here, and I guess they are interested in the kidnapping side of things. They are not interested any way, shape, and form of assassination. And a matter of fact, I guess from what everybody said, the reaction was kind of severe enough that Booth just kind of brushes it off, like, "Oh, I've been too deep in my cups drinking. Just ignore me. I'm kind of sudsed. Just ignore what I have to say." But in his mind, he's convinced that we have to assassinate Lincoln. So what's going to end up happening is, and that may just be, of course, when you're on trial and after the fact, everybody's trying to say, well, I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know how bad it was going to be. Keep in mind, a lot of this is going to be kind of he said, she said, and so everyone's trying to clear their name, so kind of keep that in mind. So you're going to have this guy here, Adzerat, who is going to target Andrew Johnson. One of the things that's interesting is he actually books a hotel room directly above Johnson, kind of scouts it out, does some reconnaissance, and from what he said, he was perfectly okay with the kidnapping plot, but when it came to assassination, that was not his cup of tea at all. Matter of fact, he actually basically says to John Wilkes Booth, "I'm not interested in it, count me out," and Booth basically says, "Well, you're going to do it. I've already signed your name to a manifesto that I'm sending to the papers announcing that I was the one who did this. Your name's attached to it, buddy. So basically, you've got nowhere to go. You're going to do this." Adzerat is going to check into the hotel where Johnson is staying, but I guess he makes such a fool of himself just asking, very pointed questions like, "Oh, the vice president, what does he do? What's his schedule like? When does he come up for dinner? When does he come out for dinner?" All that kind of, that people, the hotel owner paid attention to him because he was just that nosy and inquisitive. And what ends up happening is the night of the assassination, April 14th, 1865, Atzerodt is just going to basically sit downstairs and become more and more and more drunk and never actually does anything. I think Booth kind of knew that Atzerodt probably wasn't going to go through with it, so what he does is he actually swings by earlier in the day and leaves a note for Johnson. Says, "Don't wish to disturb you. Are you at home? John Wilkes Booth." To her dying day, Mary Lincoln was convinced that this was the smoking gun that was left here, so that Johnson was in on it. He and Booth were in cahoots, and there were rumors that in Tennessee that Booth and Johnson crossed paths and may have actually shared girlfriends at some point. I don't know how true that is, but there are rumors of that. And then the other thing that was interesting is this note. There's no real why did he leave it. It's kind of cryptic. There's no real reason why he did, but maybe it was so that Atzerodt would go ahead and pull the trigger literally. It's really hard to know for sure. Lewis Payne is going to target Secretary of State William Seward. Seward is going to actually be recovering from a carriage accident that had happened. The horses got spooked. He gets thrown out and then breaks his arm and is going to end up actually breaking his jaw. One of the things that's interesting is he had actually lost most of his top teeth, and so there was really nothing for the jaw to be kind of wired to. And so one of the things that they did is they put like a plastic sheath. You can kind of see it a little bit, I guess, here on his neck. And Payne, what his job is to do is to basically, he's going to knock on the door, act like he has a package of medicine for Seward, and is going to give it to him. So very, very... very long story short, knocks on the door, the butler opens it, Frederick Seward's going to open it, the son, and Payne is going to be like, "Hey, I have a package here for Seward. I have his medicine, I'm here to give it to him." And Frederick, the son, is like, "We didn't order any medicine, there's nothing for him." And Payne basically kind of keeps, trying to push his way in the door and says, "No, I've got medicine for him, it's good, I got the medicine." And what ends up happening is the conversation just keeps going in circles, and finally, and you can see Payne is actually a pretty, probably the strongest out of all the assassins that are going to be involved in this plot. They're all trying to attack at roughly the same time, 10 o'clock on April 14th, 1865. So what ends up happening is there's going to be, Payne is going to pull a gun on Frederick Seward, so William Seward's son, pulls it, gun jams. And so he basically beats Frederick Seward until he's unconscious on the floor, and then runs up the stairs and runs into the butler. And I guess you kind of got this crazed panting guy at the top of the stairs. "Where's the Secretary of State?" And he's kind of trying to stall him, says he's sleeping, I don't know where he is. And then unfortunately what is going to end up happening is Fanny Seward, who was William Seward's daughter, comes out of the room and says, "Father's awake now." So it's almost like that, kind of like the Looney Tunes moment where everybody kind of freezes and blinks, where it's like now he knows what room he's in and that he's awake. So he busts in through the door, and Seward is kind of sitting on the bed. He's got his arm kind of dangling off, right arm on the floor, and then he's kind of propped up on the pillows. The room is dark. It's not very well lit. And Payne Powell's going to jump on the bed here and is going to take this knife, which you can see pictured here, and just stab repeatedly. And this is a picture of him in custody after the assassination attempt. But what's going to end up happening, here's a picture of what it would look like. He jumps on top of him and just starts stabbing and stabbing and stabbing and stabbing. And the room is, of course, covered in blood. People are trying to get him off of him. The butler's involved. The daughter's involved. People are screaming. Somebody runs out of the house screaming, "Murder, murder, murder," at the top of their lungs. And he somehow miraculously misses all the major arteries, the jugular vein, all of that. And just to go back, you can kind of see on Seward's face, he would often pose with the right side away from the cameras. He actually cuts a chunk of his cheek almost all the way off Seward's face. And he actually cut a nerve, and Seward's right side drooped kind of for the rest of his life. And so what is going to end up happening is he thinks that he has killed Seward, runs out of the house screaming, "I'm mad, I'm mad, I'm mad," bolts to his horse, and he and David Harold, who's another one of the conspirators, are going to ride off into the night. Mary Surratt is going to own the boarding house where this plan was hatched, and it was in Surrattsville, which is named after one of her ancestors. And there's a lot of debate to this day about how much she knew. It seems like there was a pretty strong consensus right after the events of this that she was behind it, had something to do with it, and then afterwards it's kind of changed a little bit here. But she was pretty involved. Matter of fact, Johnson said her house was kind of the nest that hatched the egg, and it does seem like she was pretty involved with this. John Surratt was Mary Surratt's son. He was a major player in the plot. He really kind of has nothing to do with this attempt, interestingly enough, and he's actually in New York when the news reaches him, and he's going to flee to Montreal, which was known as Little Richmond because there was a lot of pro-Confederacy sympathizers there. He's going to flee to Canada and then to Europe. And one of the fascinating parts of this story is he is going to actually end up becoming one of the Papal Guards. It was in Zouave uniform. And this is not the Papal Guard uniform, it's a different regiment. And when he's there, he's actually recognized by somebody who's like, hey, weren't you one of those people that was like on the wanted posters all across the U.S. for the assassination of Lincoln? He panics, flees, ends up going to Alexandria, Egypt, gets arrested there, and is shipped back to the U.S. Keep in mind, a good bit of time has gone by at this point. And he is put on trial, interestingly enough, for the same offenses his mother is going to end up being convicted for, and he is found innocent because the statute of limitations had elapsed. It was more than 7 years. It was not until after the assassination of Kennedy in 1963 that killing a president was actually a federal offense. Up to that point, it was just like killing anybody else, and then after the assassination of Kennedy, that's going to be where it really changes. And I guess the statute of limitations in the 1860s had expired, and so he gets off scot-free. Basically, and this is kind of, to me, is kind of bald-faced, he tries to do a couple of lectures based off of this, tries to make some money, because I guess he's kind of poverty-stricken. And so he tries doing a couple of lectures and basically is booed off stage after the first one or two of these, kind of quits and doesn't really get involved anymore with that. But he's trying to make money off the fact that he killed Lincoln, which is crazy. Here's a picture of Ford's Theater, and in Ford's Theater, it's kind of an unassuming building now, but it's been kind of preserved the way that it would have been when Lincoln is here. And just to show you, here's kind of a picture of what the inside looks like, and then you can see the presidential box with the yellow curtains on it. You have the second floor right here, and then you have the stage where this would have been performed. We'll come back to that more in just a minute. So right now, Johnson's assassin has just kind of taken the night off and gotten himself drunk. Seward's assassin, he thinks he's killed Seward, and I guess you can kind of understand why. The room was dark. He's stabbing everywhere at the pillows and somehow misses. He hits the neck guard that Seward has and doesn't slice his neck. Seward's going to survive, but what's going to end up happening is, unfortunately, Booth is going to be a little more successful. 15 people are going to turn down invitations to be with the Lincolns at Ford's Theater. One of them was Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War. He's an interesting character in and of himself. We'll touch on him real briefly here. He is actually not really a big fan of Lincoln. He was a really good lawyer, and matter of fact, so much so that he's actually going to be offered a seat on the Supreme Court by Grant. The Senate confirms him 46-11 at the time, and then he is going to be the only person who actually is going to be confirmed to the Supreme Court, but dies before he can actually take his seat. And to this day, he's the only Supreme Court nominee that is confirmed, but dies before he actually can, become a Supreme Court justice. So there's been a lot of debate about whether Stanton was involved in this or not. He actually encourages Grant to not be there at Ford's Theater that night, and some of the things that he does is going to lead to speculation that Stanton knew or was somehow involved in the plot to kill Lincoln. One of the things that's fascinating to me about Stanton is he knew what it was like. He lost his wife. She she died relatively young. They were only married, I think, 6 or 7 years. And so when she dies, he kind of loses it mentally to the point where he has her body kind of preserved the way that it would have been when they were married. Has her dressed up in her wedding outfit, and basically is obsessed with having her look exactly the way she did on the day that she got married. And then at night, he would wander around his house with tears in his eyes, saying, "Oh, Mary, where are you? Mary, where are you?" Mourning his wife. here, and would just wander around the house looking for her. And it's interesting to me that I guess everybody handles grief differently. For him, when his wife dies, he kind of loses it, but when Lincoln dies, he's kind of in control, he's on top of things, and he's really kind of the calmer presence in the room. And everyone is different, I will say that. Like, the way that people react when others die versus, the way that they react when it's their family. He is going to end up getting remarried, but it is to a girl who is 16 years younger than him. They did seem to genuinely love each other, but it was a very interesting age gap between. But that was fairly common back in the this time period. There's just a lot more death and a lot more age gap between people. It was not unusual. This person here is Schuyler Colfax, who would have been the Speaker of the House, and if the assassination had gone through and Colfax had gotten killed and Johnson had gotten killed, there would have been almost like a succession crisis. Who would have taken over if the Speaker of the House was dead, if Johnson was dead, and Lincoln was dead? And we'll talk about that in just a second. And then it was John Wilkes Booth is actually here to pick up his mail, and that's where he finds out that the Lincolns are going to be attending Ford's Theater that night. That's where he picked up his mail, was at the theater. It was not uncommon for people to see Booth here at all, and he goes in believing that the Grants are going to be there. Interestingly enough, the fact that Mrs. Grant and Mrs. Lincoln do not get along at all actually saved Grant's life. They did not get along at all, and every time she would go, I guess Mrs. Grant hated the way how petty Mrs. Lincoln was, or how she just would make everybody feel, and so she actually sent him a telegram as he's talking to Lincoln saying, hey, can you come home to New Jersey? I'm not really interested in being, let's go home and see our children. I'm not really interested in going with the Lincolns. And he tells Lincoln that. One thing that I will say is interesting is one of the people who turned down the invitation was actually Robert Lincoln, who would have been Lincoln's oldest son. So I don't think there was any foul play on that side of things. There's been a lot of debate as some of the people knew something was going on, but for the most part, it does seem as if just Mrs. Lincoln was kind of just toxic enough that people did not get along with her very well. You're going to have Major Rathbone and Clara Harris, who kind of go down in infamy. They agree to go with the Lincolns to the theater. And the interesting thing that kind of blew my mind when I was researching this is they were step-siblings. So Clara Harris's father was a New York senator, and what's going to end up happening is his wife is going to die, and then Major Rathbone's father is going to die. They're going to end up getting together as far as being stepbrother, stepsister. He was 14, she was 11. It still, to me, seems kind of, it's just even by 1800 standards, this just still seems a little bit odd and kind of disgusting. But they end up falling in love and are engaged at the time when they go with them to the theater. And they're going to end up getting married, but unfortunately for them, their lives do not really go well afterwards. I'll kind of do a quick tangent here and then kind of go back to the story. It's not really a spoiler in this case, but they're so overcome by the fact that they couldn't prevent Lincoln's death, Major Rathbone especially, that he actually starts to go insane. They have 3 children together. They actually flee to Europe because they said they were so sick of every time they go into a restaurant, people would stare at them, they'd whisper about them. Oh, it must have been so rough for you being there. And they just couldn't stand it, so they fled to Europe. They had 3 children together, but then Major Rathbone is going to lose his mind. He's convinced that Clara is running around with him on another guy, and that wasn't the case. He basically goes to the bedroom to kill his kid, and Clara stands in front of him, and he is going to end up killing her. And what ends up happening is he's going to get thrown into an insane asylum, and he's going to spend the rest of his life there. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that were involved this night, their lives do not have these kind of happy endings. Don't really end very well at all. So what's going to happen is John Wilkes Booth, and I'll go back to this picture in a minute, but just to show you, he's going to do some reconnaissance. He has less than a day to put his plans for killing Lincoln together. And you can kind of see in the back here, you've got the bust of Lincoln on the second floor, kind of where my mouse pointer is. And what John Wilkes Booth is going to do is he knows that there's a door right here, and then there's an entryway, and then there's another door that's going to lead directly to the presidential box. He basically is going to take like a music stand, kind of like the cylinder pole part of it. He's going to hide that. He's going to drill a peephole through the door so that he can see where the Lincolns are. And then he's also going to kind of, he's been in this theater a bunch of times. He's an actor. Not unusual for him to be here at all. And so what's going to end up happening is he comes in a couple of times when the Lincolns are there. The first time he actually is going to somehow crawl underneath the stage, and he can hear by where they're at in the play. I guess it was a popular enough play that he knows he's got plenty of time. He actually goes to the bar, gets a couple of drinks, and the guard, ironically enough, is also going to be at the bar getting some drinks as well. And he knows that there's going to be a line in the play that's guaranteed to get like the loudest laugh, like the biggest laugh line of the evening. So he knows he's still got a little bit of time to kind of get things planned. And then I guess he's going to kind of come back in the, later on in the play, work his way across the second floor. People commented on seeing him here. But once again, keep in mind, it was not unusual for John Wilkes Booth to be here. He was a well-known actor, very high caliber. And we, of course, have the benefit of hindsight knowing what he was and what kind of a man he was and what his plans were that evening, but many people did not at that time. All they knew of him was he was a famous actor, just like his brother and just like his father. So we've already talked about all the people who turned down invitations. We've talked about them. And then very interesting way that Booth is going to go about this assassination. It's got the marks of an actor all over it. So he has a single one-shot Derringer pistol, and his plan is, and this picture's a little bit off here, he basically goes behind Lincoln and is going to kind of shoot him behind the left ear. And mercifully, Lincoln doesn't really know what hit him. They said that he was probably dead before he hits the back of the chair. The bullet's actually going to kind of lodge below his right eyeball, and then he has the knife. And of course, this is where he kind of realizes, number one, the Grants are not here, and there's a lot of debate as to what Booth says when he fires the shot, because there's that famous laugh line, an explosion of laughter, and then he fires the shot, and some people didn't hear it, some people thought it was part of the play. And what ends up happening is some people think that Booth screamed liberty, some people say that he was silent, some people say that the South was avenged, and this is where you're going to kind of start seeing a lot of differing stories about what happened, which is very common. When you have a lot of people in one event, you're going to get different versions of the same story, and that's actually pretty common. The police actually will say when everybody has the same story, it's a sign that somebody's lying, if everything lines up perfectly. So Major Rathbone, you can see off in the corner, is going to kind of stand up here. I'm not sure why they're all kind of in the, I guess maybe there's a stain on this here, but Booth brought along a Bowie knife for killing Grant with. Major Rathbone is going to stand up and challenge him. You can see this is the single shot Derringer pistol he's going to use, and then the size of the pistol ball here. And then here's a copy of the knife that Booth would have used. Rathbone's going to lunge at him. He's going to slash Rathbone's arm all the way down to the bone, and he is going, Rathbone at this point is kind of bleeding profusely, but the adrenaline is kind of kicked in, and there's a lot of debate as to what happens next. So let me go back one more time. So this is the presidential box. Booth is going to jump about 11 and a half, 12 feet to the ground. Excuse me here. And I'm not 100% sure. I did a little bit of looking. It looks like that Booth is going to jump from here. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it was because Rathbone is blocking the exit right here. And if everything still holds the same, I mean, he has a very narrow ledge to land on. And some people say that when Booth is about to jump, Rathbone is going to grab at John Wilkes Booth's coattails and is going to try to grab him and keep him from going down. If he does, he throws him off balance. Booth's spurs are going to get caught in this bunting, and he is going to land hard on the ground. There's a lot of debate about this. Some people say that he broke his ankle when he hits the ground, which he very well could have. He could have just adrenalined it out to his horse. He's waving around this bloody knife in the middle of the stage, screaming out "Sic semper tyrannis," thus to all tyrants, the South is avenged. So he's waving around this kind of bloody knife, and people weren't sure what was going on because, of course, keep in mind, like, there's this kind of, it's a laugh line in the play. All of a sudden, bam, this famous actor comes falling down from the window. I mean, maybe everybody thought it was part of the play. And he's slashing at anybody who comes near him. And then there's a scream that happens from the presidential box, and I think it was Mary Lincoln who's like, the president's been shot, someone help, help. And I guess as one, everyone starts chanting out the name, Booth, Booth, Booth. And they knew who it was, and it's one of the few times in history where everybody knows exactly who the assassin was and what they did. John Wilkes Booth, in his manifesto that he mailed to some newspapers, made no bones about this. But what's going to end up happening is they said people were trying to hoist themselves up into the presidential box. There are people beating on the door, which is held shut with that music stand. And so what ends up happening is Rathbone is he's actually losing consciousness from blood loss. He's going to work his way, open the door, get rid of that music stand so that the door opens, and then he kind of passes out from the loss of blood. And of course, everybody's more focused on Lincoln at the time than on him. So, kind of going back to this really quickly. So, some people say that Booth broke his ankle right here. Some people say that Booth actually landed just fine, and then he's somehow going to fall off his horse in the middle of the night, in which very well could have happened. He gets out of, he rides into Maryland about 20 minutes after the assassination. One of the guys that is, outside the theater holding his horse actually had been woodworking with Booth back in the day. He and Booth were both really good woodworkers. And so Booth just has to kind of stay ahead of the news. And we've already talked about all of this. We mentioned, of course, the weapon. We talked about the knife. And then you can see here he's running off waving this bloody knife. And you can kind of see even down here it's a little bit of a narrow drop. So excuse me, maybe he very well could have broken his ankle when he hits the ground. Or he could have broken it when he falls off and his horse rolls on him. Either way, by the time he gets to Samuel Mudd's house, who's a doctor who has kind of pro-Southern sympathies, Booth's ankle is so inflamed that they have to cut the boot off. If the plot had gone off as expected, this man, Lafayette Sabine Foster, would have been the 17th president. He was president pro temp of the Senate, and you can see he is from Connecticut here, was very well known, very educated, and would have been the next in line if Johnson had been killed, if Schuyler Colfax, the Speaker of the House, had been killed. This is the man who would have been the 17th president of the United States. And interestingly enough, he probably would have been a little bit better than Andrew Johnson was. And during parts of Andrew Johnson's presidency, if Johnson had died, or I think even up until parts of the impeachment, he would have been in line. Let's talk real quickly about Robert Lincoln, and we'll kind of mention a few more things with Lincoln's death as well. So Robert Lincoln, of course, is going to show up, and he is beyond mortified of what's happened. His mother is she'd come in and she would see her husband on the bed, because what they realize is that Lincoln, there's no way he's going to survive this. It's a pretty mortal wound. He's actually paralyzed from the shot and is going to die about 9 hours later. And Robert Lincoln is going to be brought in. Tad, who is the other surviving son, is going to be brought in. He actually had kind of a cleft palate and spoke with a little bit of a speech impediment, which I thought was interesting. And he's going to be brought in, screaming that they killed my pa, they killed my pa. And he's going to be brought in. And then Robert Lincoln is, he would have been in his 20s at the time, is also going to be brought in as well. And when Robert Lincoln shows up, his life is about to take some real crazy turns. He is going to be one of the few people that's going to be present around the assassination of 3 presidents. So he, of course, is going to be there with his dad when his dad is assassinated. And Lincoln is going to be stretched out on a bed diagonal because he is so long he can't fit on it. And one of the crazy parts to me is after Lincoln dies here, and of course, he dies about 7 in the morning, and that's where Stanton utters the famous line, "Now he belongs to the ages." And what's going to end up happening is, incredibly, the bed is still slept in, that next night by the guy who had rented it out. And Ford actually tried to open up Ford's Theater after all of this a couple of days later, and the public outcry was so severe that their Ford's Theater never ends up opening again for a play because of its association here. So he's actually going to be Secretary of War under Garfield, so modern-day Secretary of Defense. He's actually walking about 40 feet away from Garfield when he sees him get shot, and is actually going to be one of the people who is involved in this or around in this assassination of Garfield. And then his train, he's actually invited by William McKinley to go to Buffalo to the Pan American Exhibition. He gets there, and basically his train pulls into the station. Excuse me. And he finds out that McKinley has been shot. He visits with him. He finds out that McKinley's actually going to get better. And so he leaves, and of course, McKinley is going to end up dying, unfortunately for history. I wish I could say that was the end of all the craziness with Robert Lincoln, but we're just getting started. So to kind of mention a few more things with Lincoln, he is going to have a couple of children that are going to, obviously be the grandkids of Abraham Lincoln that he'll never get to see, and one of them was Abraham Lincoln II. And Robert actually tells his son, who they nicknamed Jack, that you're going to have to earn your name. And one of the things that I thought was really cool about this is he actually really kind of took a shine to his grandfather and got so good at copying his grandfather's writing that it was hard to tell the difference between Jack and Abraham Lincoln's writing. Here's a picture of Edwin Booth, and they actually said that there would have been no way that Robert would have had kids if there was not for an incident that happened during the Civil War. He is at Jersey City, New Jersey, Robert Lincoln is, and he is standing waiting for a train, and he is accidentally shoved. I guess he falls off the platform, or somebody accidentally pushes him off, or nudges him off is probably a better word, but into the middle of an oncoming train. And he said that the train most likely would have run him over and killed him, and that would have been yet another son that the Lincolns would have lost. They were, not unfamiliar with losing sons, but they would have lost another one. And they said that he would have ended up being killed. But as he's on the tracks, a hand reaches down, grabs him, and yanks him up onto the platform out of the path of the oncoming train. He is going to look up to thank his rescuer, and he finds out that it's none other than Edwin Booth, who is the brother of John Wilkes Booth. And it's just crazy that Edwin Booth is actually going to save Robert Lincoln's life, whereas John Wilkes Booth is going to take his father's life. Just thought that was really a fascinating story. And Robert said it was something that he was kind of shocked about, because everybody knew Edwin. He was super famous, very, very well known. And when he looked into his rescuer's face to thank him, he was shocked to realize it was none other than the celebrated actor Edwin Booth. So here's another picture of Jack, and you can see he was pretty lanky like his grandfather, and unfortunately for him, he's going to have some sort of a cyst or a boil on his left arm that is going to end up getting infected, and he's going to die at the age of 16. So here's a picture of him with two of his sisters. His sisters are going to make it to adulthood. They're going to have a couple of children of their own, but as far as the Lincoln name, having a son that with the Lincoln name, Jack is going to be the last of the Lincolns here. So you can see Mary and then Jessie. She's going to be very famous in her own right. If you ever get a chance to look her up, she's quite the character. Edwin, as you can imagine, something I don't know how I'd be able to deal with is when you find out that your family member is infamous for all the wrong reasons. And Edwin is going to write a letter to the nation after finding out his brother shot and killed the president and was also dead. It says, "It has pleased God to lay at the door of my afflicted family the lifeblood of our great, good, and martyred president. Prostrated to the very earth by this dreadful event, I am yet too sensible that other mourners filled the land. To them, to you, one and all, go forth our deep, unutterable sympathy, our abhorrence, and our detestation for this most foul and atrocious of crimes." Edwin Booth's response, to this was basically to never mention his brother again. And if anybody else brought his brother up, it did not go well. It was almost like his brother was dead to him, had never been born, and he's just going to basically disappear from public for a while. And then he does come back. And matter of fact, I think he performs at one point for Grover Cleveland. He was kind of resurrects his career and was still he was probably the best Booth as far as actors go, and people really truly did enjoy going to see Edwin Booth perform. I think Hamlet was one of his better known performances. So as you can see, the War Department puts out a $100,000 reward for the murderer. You can see that Booth is going to be a $50,000 reward, and then there's $25,000 for Surratt, which is going to mentioned. We talked a little bit about that already with his story, and then David Harold, who is going to ride off with Booth. Harold actually, he meets up with Booth, and he thinks that Seward's been killed. Booth basically tells him that I've killed Lincoln, and that's where Harold wants to get out. And Booth says, "Oh, nothing doing. I'll let them know that you were in on it. It's ride or die," and they're going to ride off together. Very, very condensed story. The Booth is going to basically ride just ahead of things for a while. He goes to Dr. Samuel Mudd's house. He doesn't tell Mudd what's happened, but basically says, "I was out riding, something happened, and I need my leg reset," because I guess his ankle is just absolutely on fire and bothering him. And so what ends up happening is Dr. Mudd is going to set the ankle, and then they cut the boot off, And Mudd goes into town for something, and he hears Union cavalry talking about they're looking for Booth because he's assassinated Lincoln. And he comes home and he says, "What the heck have you done? You can't stay here anymore." Kicks him out. And very, very condensed story again. I wish we had more time for this. Maybe we'll kind of talk about it more later. But I've already taken up so much of your time as it is. So Booth is going to be hunted down and killed in Port Royal, Virginia, and he's hiding out in a tobacco barn. I guess he's stayed at this family's house for a couple of days. They don't know who he is. He shaved off his mustache. He's got a false beard that he's using. And what ends up happening is people are starting to slowly piece together his travels. He... Dr. Mudd is going to get caught because Booth's boot had been hidden underneath a bed with the initials JWB on it. We talked about how Booth kind of marks everything. And what ends up happening is the gig's going to be kind of up for Dr. Mudd. He's going to end up serving a couple of years. I think he serves about 6 years in federal prison. And then Booth is going to be hunted down. Keep in mind, of course, I don't know what his end plan was. Was he going to go to Mexico? Was he going to go to Texas? Was he going to go way down south? It doesn't really seem like Booth put that together as what he was going to do long term. And it seems like up to a certain point, Booth knew where he was going to go, what he was going to do, and then he has to kind of improvise. When people start kicking him out, wanting nothing to do with him, he and Harold are actually going to hide in the woods for a while. And this goes on for about 12 days. And at one point, I guess, they're in the woods and the Union soldiers come fairly close to where they're at, but they don't see him. And they're hiding out in this tobacco drying barn here. And Booth is going to be hunted down. Stanton actually gives strict instructions. He wants Booth taken alive. You're going to have this guy, Boston Corbett, who is going to be credited with firing the kill shot. There's a lot of debate about this, and we'll mention that really briefly, but Boston Corbett is kind of an interesting character in and of himself. Relatively short man. He was not very tall. I think he was only 5'4", and he is going to lose his wife in a stillborn birth. It was not uncommon back in the day. Childbirth actually killed more women just from infection or complications than anything else. And he loses his mind and kind of becomes borderline insane. Before this, he had been apprenticed to a hat maker. And hat makers often would use mercury to make hats, and this is actually going to lead to insanity a lot that would run in the hat makers' clubs or circles, which leads to the expression "mad as a hatter." If any of you have seen Alice in Wonderland, you kind of know a little bit of that. And I guess in this case it's true because Boston Corbett really does kind of start to become really nuts, to the point where he's really not well liked by a lot of people around him. He's known to be insubordinate, won't listen to orders, thinks his way is the best. And he does find the Lord. I guess he, in Boston, is actually going to end up coming to a faith in Christ. Obviously, only the Lord knows how true of a conversion that was, but he's going to change his name to the city where he found God. And then, I guess, at one point, he is on his way, I don't remember where he was, what town in particular, but he's on his way somewhere, and he's accosted by two women of the night. And this really bothers him. He turns them down. He's not interested in, brothel or anything like that. But this really just kind of gnaws on him. And so when he comes home, he starts reading the Bible, and he opens it to the passage where it says, "Blessed are those who are eunuchs for make themselves eunuchs." I'm paraphrasing here, for the kingdom of God's sake. And he decides, well, if that's what the Bible says, I'm going to do it. So he takes a pair of scissors and basically just neuters himself on the spot. And as the story goes, he neuters himself. He sits down, eats a dinner. He takes a walk. He goes to a prayer meeting. And only then does he go to a doctor to, I guess, for the bleeding or, all the stuff that could have happened there. And so he basically literally truly does make himself a eunuch for the kingdom of heaven's sake. The problem is he doesn't stop his insubordination. He doesn't stop thinking he knows best and just disobeying orders. At one point, I think he almost ends up getting tossed into a federal prison for just not listening to his superiors. And in this case, he kind of does the same thing. He sees Booth hiding out in the barn. Harold begs to be allowed to leave, and Booth basically allows him to. He's going to do kind of his last stand here. Corbett's going to sneak around behind him, fire a shot that goes up in between, I think it was his second and third vertebrae, and basically paralyzes Booth instantly. He's going to be dragged from the barn, and Booth, interestingly enough, just like Lincoln, is going to be paralyzed from the moment he's shot. until he dies, and actually slowly over the course of 3 hours is just asphyxiating, suffocating to death. And right before he dies, I think he says a couple of things like, "Tell my mother I love her and that I died for my country." And then his last words were he asked for his hands to be held up in front of his face, and he looks at them and he mutters the words, "Useless, useless." And those are the last words that Booth will say. There's a lot of debate as to whether Booth was the one who was shot in this barn or not in Port Royal, Virginia. Some people think that Harold could have been him. There's been a ton of debate about it. A lot of books, a lot of documentaries that are done about this. The one thing that does fuel a lot of people, and I can understand a little bit about this, is the caliber of the bullet and the angle, the angle that would have hit Booth. Does seem to could not have come from Boston Corbett's gun. Either way, he's going to take the credit for it. And then here's a picture of Boston Corbett, the little guy right here, I guess next to one of his another officer in the Army. And what's going to end up happening is Corbett's actually going to kind of just disappear from the pages of history. We have no idea where he went. He just disappears out into the west. Some people think he could have died in a wildfire that happened in Hinckley, Minnesota, way back in the day. There are other people that think he just, ends up getting shot and killed somewhere out in the west. But either way, he just disappears from the record. If you ever get a chance to look more into Boston Corbett's story, really, really fascinating. Booth is going to die right around the time that Lincoln's funeral train is in Albany, New York. The 4 conspirators are going to be put on trial, and one of the things that was really interesting about this is Stanton is going to have masks on them, or hoods that are over them, basically just slits for them to eat and to breathe. I don't even think they had eye holes, and they're going to kind of suffer pretty miserably. They're going to be put on a military tribunal, and this was not unheard of. This was actually something that could have was pretty easy, had been done before. And basically, they're all going to be found guilty, and they're going to be hung on July 7th, 1865. You can see all the soldiers standing around to make sure there's no rescue attempt or anything, and then you can see they're kind of reading out the, kind of the last rites, if you want to put it that way. And then here is all of them being hung. And Mary Surratt was actually the only woman to be put to death by the U.S. government for assassination, conspiracy. And what's going to end up happening here is up until she is hung, public opinion was very strong on her getting hung. She actually thinks up until the moment of her execution that she is going to be saved. There were a couple judges on the panel who actually recommended leniency for her. They send a draft of a letter to President Johnson. It does not make it there. After that, there's going to be a ton of people saying that she should not have been hung, and her son is, of course, going to be not acquitted, but basically statute of limitations runs out on the same evidence that she was hung on. Here's the funeral train is going to travel, and I wrote a couple of things down about this, and let me just make sure I get my story straight here. So, what's going to end up happening with all of this was that it's going to travel over the course of about 3 weeks, and you can see it goes from Washington to Harrisburg, and Buchanan's actually going to stand along the tracks. The president who was in office before Lincoln is going to stand along the tracks. Millard Fillmore is going to see it in Buffalo, another former president, and it's going to kind of be where people can pay like their last respects and their homage. And his son Willie's coffin is also going to be on there as well. And they said, and I want to make sure, it traveled 1,600 miles. It stopped at 400 different towns. And this is really going to be a way where people can kind of pay their respects and can grieve. And Lincoln is actually going to be placed in the East Room of the White House, and much like his dream predicted, he was going to be there. And then he lay in state at Harrisburg. He's in New York. And then the lines were miles and miles long to see his body. As they're going through New York City, one of the fascinating parts was there was two things. There was a group of African Americans who were going to march along behind in Lincoln's funeral procession. There were people who said that, oh no, that's not going to happen. And Stanton was like, oh yes it is, or the parade is not going to take place. So he basically says they can march, but unfortunately, and it's just so sad, it was such a sad time period back then as far as the way that people would treat other people. It's just something that was not unheard of for that era. They were the African Americans wanted to. I think some of them were afraid of reprisals, and so they didn't. But they were given permission, and Stanton basically said, "We will not let them march." Or if they can't march, we're not going to have a parade at all. But as the parade is passing, you can see there's in the window is Teddy Roosevelt and his brother actually watching this funeral procession. So one future president of the United States is watching, the 26th president is watching the funeral procession for the 16th president of the United States. In New York City as well, there was only one picture of the coffin that was snapped. And I guess it ends up leaking out. Stanton finds out about it, and he actually is going to order all prints and all copies to be destroyed. And he keeps a copy for himself. And I guess it's in his papers when he dies. It passes along to his son. And then his son gives it to somebody else, and it just stays in the papers in Iowa, of all places, for up until the 1950s. It was in 1952, a 14-year-old boy is actually going to stumble across this, and you can see kind of a picture of what Lincoln would have looked like lying in state. By the time he gets to Springfield, because keep in mind, they didn't have formaldehyde, they didn't have all the stuff they do now, Lincoln's face was actually black, and they had to do some pretty major pancaking of makeup on his face to make it look presentable. And I guess they said they even dimmed the lights and everything in Springfield, but by that point it was pretty obvious that Lincoln was kind of unrecognizable. They said that the underneath his right eye, where the musket ball or the pistol ball was, you could kind of tell it had been majorly swollen. You could kind of see like the swelling, and even I think a little bit of where the musket ball would have been. And so Lincoln is going to be kind of pretty well starting to decompose by the time he hits Springfield. There was a ton of debate about where he was supposed to be buried. The Founding Fathers wanted him in one place by the train tracks. Mary insisted on having him in Oak Ridge Cemetery, which was a little more secluded area. She's going to end up winning out, and this is where Lincoln is buried to this day. His his body in the after his death has a story that is almost as crazy as some of the events we've talked about today. So, couple things real quick. In 1876, he's gonna be buried. He's gonna be moved a bunch of different times. I think they said his coffin was opened at least 5 times from 1865 to 1901. He's gonna be moved around, I think, almost 18 times, just different places. And in 1876, on Election Day, there was a group of counterfeiters who actually wanted to bust one of their guys out of jail, and they figured the easiest way to do it would be to steal Lincoln's corpse and hold it for ransom. Unbeknownst to them, they have a government informant in their midst, and the plot is actually spoiled as they're trying to, pry Lincoln's coffin out of its place. And so what ends up happening is Robert Lincoln is severely concerned about this, and so what he does is he has there's a cage that's going to be built around his mother when she dies. He actually is going to have her put in an insane asylum at one point. She fights to get out, and as you can kind of imagine, relations between the mother and son are not super good. But when she dies, she's going to be buried here as well, and Willie's going to be here, and then Tad will also be here. Robert, interestingly enough, is the only son not to be buried with his family in Springfield, Illinois, and I'll come back to that more in just a second. So what's going to end up happening with this arrangement is Robert wants them to be buried underneath 10 feet of concrete, and even the place in the tomb is going to be kind of not centered, so that way it'll lure away people who are going to try to dig up the coffin. So in 1901, when they're going to move Lincoln's body to where they're going to basically surround it in 10 feet of concrete in a steel cage and bury it, they want to make sure that it's actually Lincoln. And so they get this bright idea, and I say bright and kind of sarcastically, to basically chisel open Lincoln's coffin and see if it is actually him himself. So they do, and I guess they said the smell was incredible, incredibly putrid, and they actually recoiled. It was so bad. And then they all looked in and they said it was Lincoln. His wart was still there. His face was still there. It was black, but it was still there. Interestingly enough, his gloves had deteriorated that he had been buried in. His eyebrows were gone, but they said it was still very clearly Lincoln, and it was very obvious that he hadn't really decomposed a ton facially from what they were looking at. And that the last time that anybody would have opened his coffin and looked at him was 1901. At one point, he was actually buried underneath a pile of wood inside one of the places where they had him, the crypt, and that actually deterred a lot of people because nobody really knew where his body was. Most people assumed it was underground, didn't realize it was buried under a stack of boards, and he's going to be put into this coffin here. The guy who designs Stone Mountain in Georgia, and then more famously Mount Rushmore, is actually going to be the one who is commissioned to sculpt this bust of Abraham Lincoln, Borglum. And what's going to end up happening is he does this, and even today people are kind of convinced that this is, rubbing Lincoln's nose will bring you good luck, and so you can see that Lincoln's nose is a different color than the rest of him. Here is where Lincoln's coffin is buried. He's actually not buried in this coffin at all. He's off in one of the corners of the building underneath about 10 feet of concrete. One thing I forgot to mention real quick here is Lincoln and his wife. One of the saddest things to me, and one of the similarities with him and JFK's assassination, is Lincoln and his wife and JFK and his wife were on the best terms that they had been marriage-wise when their death happened. Lincoln actually is holding Mary's hand when he gets assassinated, and I guess Mary had said, "What will Miss Harris think about my hanging on you so?" And Lincoln's last words were, "She won't notice at all." And they were holding hands when Lincoln got shot. Then you can see over here that Robert Lincoln is a little bit older at this point. He's in the 70s, and this is the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial. You can see Warren G. Harding, the president here, who is going to end up dying a couple of years later. And then you have the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and former president himself, William Taft, who was here as well. Here's a picture of the Lincoln Memorial under construction. It was built from 1914 to 1922. It's going to be delayed a little bit by World War I. But here's a few pictures of the Lincoln Memorial, and of course becomes one of the more iconic buildings in Washington, D.C. and in the U.S. And you can see they kind of built it in the middle of kind of a swampy area, field area, and of course now it's very, very popular. Robert Lincoln is going to actually be buried in Arlington Cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery, where JFK is buried and other, famous people throughout the United States. He was approached time and time again. Let me go back real quick here. He was approached time and time again to run for president, and he rightfully or understandably said, "The only reason you guys want me is because of my last name. I'm not as good of a politician as my father," and basically, does not run for office. And then this is where John Wilkes Booth is buried. His body is going to go on a fascinating story as well. There is a autopsy that is done on the USS Montauk, and the body is not released to the Booth family until 1869. And the Booths are going to end up having him buried on the Booth family plot, and nobody knows for sure exactly which one is where John Wilkes Booth is. A doctor did take a look at Booth's body during his autopsy, and there was a scar on his shoulder, and the doctor himself had actually done surgery on Booth on that shoulder and recognized that scar. But I do find it highly ironic that people will leave pennies with Lincoln's name or face, in the Lincoln Memorial on them, and they will leave them, at the Booth, family plot. Once again, nobody really knows for sure where Booth is, which one Booth's buried in, but probably more than likely, this small white one here is probably a pretty good possibility. One thing that is interesting is Edwin Booth is going to die in 1893. And then he is buried or has a funeral service in New York City and is eventually shipped back to this place in Baltimore, Maryland. But the moment that the funeral services for him are starting, Ford's Theater actually has a major collapse where the 3 floors are going to collapse into the basement, I guess, and are going to end up killing 21 people the moment that Edwin Booth's funeral starts. And so it's one of those crazy coincidences where even in death, the Booths and Ford's Theater just seem to just keep following each other or be connected. Couple things really quickly here. There are a few theories about Lincoln's assassination, and this is just kind of skimming the surface. We don't have time to hit all of them. But there's a theory that Booth wasn't actually shot at Garrett's farm, but instead he fled to Mexico, ended up in India, and eventually came back to the U.S. under a fake identity. There are people who say that that Booth kind of wised up, realized that, being an assassin really wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and basically changes his name. He gets married, he has a couple of kids of his own, and just kind of rides off into the sunset relatively anonymous. That could be the case. It doesn't seem likely with all the evidence, especially because Booth wanted everybody to know that he had done this. This was his thing. This was his way of avenging the South. It does seem a little bit unlikely, but that is going to be a theory that is here. There's also a theory that Edwin Stanton was the one behind the assassination of Lincoln. I will say this, that Stanton does seem to act oddly in some cases, where he basically kind of becomes almost like a president. Johnson's not really doing anything. But keep in mind a couple of things that I didn't mention, that Johnson actually shows up in the room where Lincoln is dying, when they bring him from Ford's Theater to the hotel across the street. And the atmosphere is so cold that Johnson ends up leaving. I guess Mary was getting so worked up every time she would see him, Mary Lincoln. And so what ends up happening is Johnson's kind of sidelined and Stanton takes charge. This hasn't been unheard of. There was a time when Reagan got shot where Alexander Haig, who was I think either Secretary of State or a little bit lower ranking cabinet official, he says that he's in charge, he's the one calling the shots, and it kind of leads to this almost comical moment. It's not been unheard of for that to happen. And Stanton does do some odd things, I will say, though, in this. But that just because you do something odd doesn't mean that you are, behind the assassination of Lincoln. If he did do this, he kind of bungled it pretty badly, because Johnson and him are going to get back and forth over things to the point where Johnson's going to try to fire Stanton because Stanton wants to really punish the South. Johnson wants to be a little bit more lenient. And really kind of Stanton is going to kind of hole up in his office, and basically Johnson is going to be impeached over this, survives it. And if that was what Stanton was gunning for, whether he wants Johnson or somebody else to be in office, he kind of fails on those accounts. Because he gets Johnson, Johnson tries to remove him. Then the Pope was the one behind the assassination. It's amazing to me how many things the Pope is behind, but there's this theory that the Pope was sent over some Jesuit spies, or had that they were somehow involved in this. That one is kind of seems to be the least evidence behind it, but that's a theory nonetheless. We kind of mentioned a little bit that Andrew Johnson was behind the assassination of Lincoln, that he and Booth somehow had a connection, and the note that was left at the hotel, that also could have had something to do with it. Johnson, once again, I think that when he comes to power, it's woefully apparent that he is way over his head. I didn't get to mention this, and I know I've been going super long, and I do apologize here, but Johnson is basically going to be pretty well drunk when he takes the oath of office as Lincoln's vice president, to the point where basically Lincoln says, "Don't let him speak at the inauguration," and things just kind of. Johnson was pretty well liked up to that point, kind of torpedoes his career, politically in an afternoon, and then just really kind of makes some very questionable choices when he becomes president. Just really, he and Lincoln differed on a lot of different things. So one other thing I was going to mention is there is this idea that Booth was not acting alone. That he got help from the Confederate states, the people in the Confederacy, that Judah Benjamin, who was a cabinet member in the Confederacy, somehow put this plot together. That one could be true. It could not be. These are all theories. I want you, feel free to do some research or have, put thoughts in the comment section what you think. I just want to bring them out here. I'm not shooting them down one way or the other. I just want to kind of bring the pros and cons of each theory here and let you guys ultimately decide what you think. The other thing I was going to say is Stanton was convinced that Jefferson Davis was the one behind it. And matter of fact, at the military tribunal, when they're trying the conspiracy of Lincoln and putting all the conspirators on trial, Stanton tries super hard, and the prosecution tries super hard to frame Jefferson Davis for the attack. And I think people realize that this has gone a little bit too far. There was no real support for it. And even Jefferson Davis himself said, "You guys don't understand. I do not like Johnson at all. If I was gonna kill Lincoln, I'd at least want somebody else to be president and not Johnson." So, because he viewed Johnson as a traitor, because Johnson was from the South and he turns his back and supports the North, and Jefferson Davis and Johnson really didn't get along at all. But there are some theories that people think And there very well could have been some disgruntled Confederate officers or people higher up that wanted Lincoln gone. A couple of recommended books that you guys might appreciate, and I've just skimmed the surface and kind of hit some of the high points, and I do appreciate you sticking with me this long. And feel free in the comments below, or feel free to give me any feedback, suggestions, criticism, whatever you would, things I can do differently or improve on. Probably make it shorter for starters. But there's Blood on the Moon: The Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Oops, let me go back. This is one that kind of postulates the idea that that John Wilkes Booth didn't act alone, that he has help from the Confederacy, and they're bankrolling and supporting him, providing places for him to escape and make his way to the Deep South. There's Manhunt, the 12-day chase for Lincoln's killer. This one is very well done and incredibly well written, and if you ever get a chance to read that, it's a very, very good book. I would definitely recommend this one. This one really kind of got me started into it. My Thoughts Be Bloody, the bitter rivalry between Edwin and John Wilkes Booth that leads to an American tragedy. This one is a very well-written book. I would recommend this one as well. And then Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It talks about all the different people, Seward and Stanton and Chase, among others, who were involved in Lincoln's cabinet. And one of the things I think is really interesting, and I really got out of reading this book, is a lot of leaders want to surround themselves with yes men, people who say and agree with everything that they do. Lincoln actually wanted people that disagreed with him, that didn't always get along, because sometimes it really helped to see the different angles and perspectives. And all of them actually, by the end of Lincoln's, when he gets even before he gets assassinated, a lot of them start coming from either despising him or not really caring for him to having a grudging respect and admiration, and some of them even really deeply appreciate him, obviously, for what he did. And it's a fascinating book there. One other book I was going to mention is The Accidental Presidents, again by Jared Cohen, if you ever get a chance. And then some YouTube channels. There's Mr. Drost History. He dives into this Lincoln's assassination and covers it in pretty good detail. People Profiles, I can't recommend them enough. They have some on Lincoln and John Brown and Booth, and they tend to look at it from middle of the road, and I really do appreciate their kind of neutral approach, even especially when you get to Booth, like trying to the good, the bad, and the ugly. You see all of it in their channel, and it's very well done. Threads from the National Tapestry, the day that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, April 14th, 1865, is also another really good one as well. And then Grave Explorations, Lincoln's Final Homecoming. That one is fantastic and covers Lincoln traveling from Washington, D.C. to where he was buried in Springfield, Illinois. Feel free to reach out, guys. I would absolutely love to hear from you. And seriously, I miss teaching. I miss being able to see you guys face to face. So feel free. Suggestions, episode ideas, critiques are always welcome. If there's anything that you would like me to cover, and I'll try to cover it in detail, hopefully a little bit shorter. But I would love to do that and do some research, and you listened to me yammer on enough when you were in school with me, and so I would absolutely love to cover a topic for you and return the favor. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you, what you're up to, how you're doing, if there's any topics you would like me to cover, critiques, comments, things that I could put in or mention differently. And my email address is steeplesandsteel@gmail.com. steeplesandsteel@gmail.com. It's all lowercase. I'm absolutely looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'm looking forward to meeting up with you again real soon. God bless, have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.